Alright, my name is Jonas, and I was asked earlier to make a quick tutorial on on the techniques I use to make my island maps. So I'm playing these games called Myst, and I've been doing so for the last, well, 2 decades or something like that. And when doing so, I started to draw maps of the islands, and this has gotten more serious over the years. And now I'm doing a digital Myst book project, and I have a lot of maps in them. So I'm gonna run through the process of how I make them. I wouldn't call it a tutorial, but it's at least some sort of, I don't know, a walkthrough. My weapons of choice is Photoshop. I use Photoshop for pretty much all the process here, and I use a Wacom tablet, or rather a Wacom Cintiq, which is a huge screen that you can draw directly on, but a Wacom tablet will work just fine. So let's get to it. You start out with the outline, or I start out with the outline of the island. So this is just a small island with, I wouldn't call, I don't know how big it is, but it's pretty small, so it's not a continent, or rather an Australian-like island continent. So these techniques will only work on this rather smaller scale. So I'm going to turn on some layers here. A note on, I use layers a lot because you can use different type of blending to make them look in a specific way, which is rather important. You have a tool presets area here, which I use a lot. These are tools that brushes that I've used for achieving a specific result that I liked, and then I save it as a tool preset. So I have a tool preset for grass, for contours, for rock lighting, rock scatter, rock shade, water paint, and stuff like that. So you have a desired effect that you can keep consistent between different maps of the project. So the first thing you do, the outline, and then you create a clipping layer that I call shading. Above that layer. The clipping layer means that the content of the clipping layer will never extend beyond the content of the underlying layer. So you can draw away where you like, how much you like. It will always be a part of this layer. I'm going to turn that on. As you can see, this is the layer where I create the shadings of the rocks. And a small note about this, I mean, this is obviously the most tedious process of creating a map. So I have a tool preset called Rock Shade, which is basically a 2-pixel pen that is set to 30% flow, which means that you can overdraw it and make it darker and darker. If I had used opacity, it will always stay the same shade, or the same flow, or I don't know what you call it. I'm from Sweden, so my English is not as good as you'd like. Either way, so you start with creating jagged lines down from the topmost to the bottommost part, and then you create shades in these parts as the way it's supposed to be. I mean, this is just a tedious process of creating a shaded area of every. I'm actually using the every other rule quite a bit here, meaning that a light area follows by a dark area, a light area, meaning that it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So you have this kind of spaghetti-like rock surfaces. It can be a bit too much in some areas, so you may want to create different kinds of larger areas that are white, or larger areas that are black or darker. So creating this, I just sit down and I listen to some music, and I drink a lot of coffee, and I start to shade away. You can be pretty free. The rules don't really apply here. The end result will never look photogenic in my way. It would just look like hand-drawn terrain, I suppose. Which is the exact result I'm after. These maps go into a book that is supposed to be hand-drawn from the experience from the game. Right, so another rule of thumb might be to consider the direction of the light. As you can see, it's a lot darker in this area than it is in this area, because the sun usually comes from the top left. This is I don't know, something that the mind always accepts as true, so or as most likely. So if you shade it so that the light comes from the top left, it will always look more correct. So this process takes several days for me. I mean, I end up sitting for hours at end just trying to create the shading correctly. And you can always put in more time to try to make it look better. It's harder to go back and erase. You have to redo a lot. So try to make it right the first time. So the next thing is create another identical layer. Oh yeah, the shading layer is actually set to blend by the overlay fashion. Which means that if I use a normal blending tool, it becomes this these black lines. Using overlay, it actually blends into the underlying color, meaning that if I change the color of the outline, which is set to a color layer with a mask. So I'm using several monitors here, so I'm gonna move that over here. So if I change the color of the ground, the shading changes as well, which is quite handy. It doesn't always look really good, but usually you have the kind of, it follows. But I'm using this earthy brownish hue. So another layer called lighting. The exact same pencil, only white. And you do the exact same technique, only you light the parts that are struck by the sun, which means that you don't have any light here or here. And you try to make it look as natural as possible. I really don't have any hints on how to make this look. I don't think I do it well. I think it needs a lot more realism to look better. But just doodle away and zoom out. If you zoom out and you think, yeah, that actually looks quite all right, and you can try to work better with a zoomed in version. I usually add a layer I call shadow, where I add in some shadows to these parts, because using the overlay blending fashion, that never gets really dark. So a shadow layer, a shadow layer means that I can create these really dark areas which aren't struck by the sun. I'm gonna turn that off now because it looks pretty cheesy without all the other objects. In this area we have a huge dome in the middle. This is just a path layer which I've added some coloring to. And we have inside that we have electrical lines going to the different parts of other islands. If you play the game, you know about this part, so I'm not going to go into them now. Then I have the paths layer. These are the areas where you can walk to them in the game, where the places you can traverse, I suppose. And then I have a coloring layer where I add some colors. Rather, should have turned on the contour layer. This is where I add the details to the map, if you will. And then I have the coloring layer for coloring those details. This is the part where I usually just rush over it to get it done, and I probably should spend some more time to make them look better. the idea here is that basically it's supposed to be a hand-drawn map, so they should look sketchy. But in the end, I always think that I should make more of an effort. And then I have a growth layer where I add some grass. The grass, I have a special brush here, which is it's just a brush that creates grass-looking areas. Oh, that's my phone. I'm sorry. I'm gonna turn that off. Sorry. And that's basically it. I'm gonna turn on the shade layer. That's basically it. I have a water paint brush, which I use to create water that looks a bit like if you have a sponge. That's a totally wrong color. So I was on the wrong layer. I trade a sponge-like effect with the water here. And for my purposes, this map now is done. Oh, sorry. So what I do is I insert it to the book, which means that it lands on this antique-looking paper. I've actually added it here, so this is what it will look like in the book. And I have some text labels that I can add. And I have a grid, which also, if you play the game, you recognize this specific grid. And that's pretty much it. This particular map took about a week, all in all, to create, I suppose. I'm actually pretty happy with the result. Even though I will return to it and try to make it look even better as time goes on. Well, thanks for watching, I suppose. I hope you understood what I said, and cheers.